All right, next we're going to talk about something very near and dear to me. Two guys in a truck. Put them in the back. Hey, I'm an MSP. I want your business. We're so great. So two guys in a truck is what we refer to as the MSP, managed services providers who want to provide cloud services. So most managed services providers that you're going to come up against are very small. There are some that are gigantic, okay? But the smaller ones we refer to as two guys in a truck. Now, how do you compete against them? You have to be very careful because they're usually legacy relationships that go back a long ways. It could be the owner's brother-in-law or an old buddy or something like that. Then there's no evolutionary pressure on that MSP to get better and to be great because he just has the relationships, right? So it's a catch-22. So you got to be very, very careful there in how you deal with the client. The MSP, generally speaking, is all about the status quo. They want things to stay the same. So they want to keep the equipment inside the business. They do not want to go to cloud. And that is a good thing for you. Now, there are some MSPs that will try to bring your client with Amazon or with Azure to another cloud. We'll talk about that in a second. When you're competing against an MSP, the MSP is going to have to be an expert in either Citrix or with VMware. It is very unlikely that they're going to be experienced with both. DaaS is very complicated. VDI is very, very complicated to do. If they're not great at it, they are going to hurt your client. Let them know that. Look for their credentials. Look at the previous work that they've done, right? Whether they do it inside the business or whether they do it in Amazon, they got to be experts. Now, the key question that you want to ask your customer when they're with an MSP, you can't be too hot, you can't be too cold. It's very simple. Are you, I'm writing this like the millennials, happy with your MSP? Very simple. Half the time they will say no, and that opens up everything as to why. You want to get in that pain and ramp up that pain as to why they're not happy. It could be a myriad of things that we've already talked about. Usually it's about bad responsiveness. They're not responding. They don't return my calls. The equipment is very old. We had a hack. Our system got hacked. They didn't know what they were doing. We can't have this happen anymore. But this question will open up all kinds of doors. Now, another question that you want to ask your customer when it comes to an MSP is, once again, how much money have they got that's backing up this truck, right? How financially stable are they? Mr. Client, if there was an economic downturn and this MSP went out of business and they couldn't keep the doors open, what would happen to your data? How likely do you think that is of happening? How big is this MSP? That's enough. You're not scaring your client, you are, but it's with a good purpose. That is a real issue, and that happens all the time. So you always want to bring up that question. Now, another way that you look at the money side of the equation is that if it's, once again, if you're dealing with an MSP that wants to move your client's data to the cloud, they may use their own data center, but they're probably going to be using Amazon or Azure, right? Which they need to be certified on those, right? They have to be certified. But they may try to keep the equipment in-house. They may try to keep the servers, and even the VDI they may try to keep in-house, right? That requires a ton of investment. You still have to invest in servers. You've got to invest in licenses. There's a ton of investment in doing VDI or DaaS internally. So run the numbers by your client. Do a total cost of ownership analysis with your client in terms of all that equipment. What's that going to cost? How quickly is that going to be outdated? How quickly is your equipment being outdated? Your competitors, if they're in the cloud, their equipment's being refreshed once every 2 years, once every 3 years? Where does that put you competitively? And then the last scenario is, of course, if they do want to use their own data centers that are hypothetically in the cloud, what do those data centers look like? What's the equipment they're using? How are they updating their equipment? Are they using FlexPods? Are they using the best of breed? How do they know how to run a data center? How many data centers have they got? If this client has employees on the West Coast and the data centers on the East Coast, or if they have multiple regions, how quickly is that DaaS going to work? It's not. It's going to be very, very slow. So has this MSP got data centers around the country? Most small MSPs definitely do not. It's going to hurt your remote employees. It's going to hurt your productivity. So great question to ask there. If there's only one data center, how redundant is it? What if something happens to this data center? Have they got another data center that's backing everything up? Or are they being backed up inside that business? Bad news, right? So there's got to be redundancy, multiple data centers that are very well connected and very redundant. And when you're talking about a cloud or talking about a data center, the big word out there right now is compliance. How compliant is this data center, right? Have they got certifications? Have they got everything they need to be doing? Have they got the paperwork that shows that your data is compliant? Mr. Customer, if you're in healthcare, if you're in legal, if you're in financial, if this data center that this MSP is not using is not checking all the boxes, you can be in big trouble if you get an audit. So these are just a few of the things that you can bring up with your customer and that you can help to improve your position when you're in a DaaS deal and you're going against an MSP.